Vi har en sällsynt modig och skarp kollega med oss här ikväll. Ni kommer att se henne i Skavlan såklart och överallt gissa de närmaste dagarna. Men hon är här först. Hon har arbetat åt New Statesman, New Republic, Slate och Vanity Fair för att nämna några av hennes kunder. Hon var tills ganska nyligen chefredaktör för Rysslands äldsta tidning, den populärvetenskapliga naturtidskriften Vakrugzjeta. Senast så skrev hon den avslöjande boken Mannen, utan ansikte som handlar om Vladimir Putin och hans väg till makten. Welcome up on stage, Masha Gessen.
Thank you.
As you saw these prizes, of course, but you may not know that as a result of one of these stories that was just awarded, the Swedish Secretary of Defense made headlines when she, during a tough interview, labeled Saudi Arabia a non-democracy.
What would that make Sweden? A non-dictatorship?
Yes, well, hopefully. Okay, Mr. Putin is known for crackdown after crackdown on human rights, always tearing his shirt off in between. How did you get stuck with this guy?
Do you mean me as a biographer?
No,
or
I'm talking
as
about the
country?
Russian people.
Right. It was an accident. In late 1999, there was a small group that surrounded then President Boris Yeltsin, who felt very besieged, very isolated, he was, and had every reason to fear that if the opposition came to power when he was done with his second term, which he was nearing the end of, that he would be prosecuted. So he needed to find somebody that he could anoint his successor, who would guarantee immunity from prosecution. And the problem was that he had actually annihilated every real politician who'd ever been close to him. They had all gone over to the opposition. So they had basically a lineup of faceless bureaucrats that they had to choose from, and they chose Putin. They could have chosen someone else.
So it's just an accident.
It was an accident.
Okay, there are thousands of people like him, but it just, it happened. He happened to be at the right place in the right time,
Right.
or wrong place at the wrong time, depending on.
Right, and the people who chose him had, incredible overconfidence, and they thought he was going to be a pawn for the rest of his life. Well, within 6 months they were out of the country.
Yeah, and they were pawns for a while, and now they're gone.
Right.
How does he rule?
He rules by stealing. He rules by scaring people. I mean, the pillars of his regime are fear, money, and personal connections. And he pulls on the three strings as best he can. What he has done, and what I think his ideal is turning Russia into the KGB that he remembers. And he, to a large extent, has succeeded in doing that.
As I understand it, he can appoint his own men to rule the different regions. And they can fire at will people that are really elected. Right. He has, in that sense, he has absolute power.
He does, and he made that very clear on his first day in office. On his first day in office, he proposed a legislative package that became the 3-year-long erosion of Russian democratic institutions. Within 3 years, he was done with elections. The only, essentially, the only directly elected official in Russia at this point is the president himself. Mm. And of course, he has all the powers needed to make sure he's always elected.
But are you saying that even formally he is a dictator?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yes. The upper house of parliament is appointed. The lower house of parliament is elected through parties, party lists, but the list of parties is designed by the Kremlin. Mm. Governors are appointed. At this point, they've, as a result of the protest movement, introduced limited elections with extreme controls. And of course, the media are controlled. And that's no secret.
Let's turn it around for discussion's sake. It's generally pretty dangerous to be a dictator, at least in the long run. How does he stay in power?
Well, I think that one of the distinguishing characteristics of a dictator, and especially of Putin, is that they have problems with long-range planning. So yes, it is dangerous in the long run, but he can't imagine the long run.
You predicted his fall?
I still predict his fall.
In what time?
He's not going to serve out his 6-year term. He was elected in March, inaugurated in May, and I think within a year and a half or so he'll be out.
And what will happen then?
Well, there's the best case scenario, and then there's not so good scenario.
Start with
The best case scenario is we get a technocratic government for a year and a half, 2 years, necessary to rebuild the institutions that he destroyed. So electoral institutions, the media, start a public conversation again so that we can actually have elections. Because of course, you can't have elections in Russia tomorrow. There are no tools for campaigning. There are no tools and there are mechanisms for holding an honest election. So we need a rebuilding period and then elections.
But to make that best case scenario happen, he has to be in some way overthrown.
Yes. I think that's exactly what will happen.
And how will that go about?
2 possibilities. One is a street-level uprising, where the police side with the people in the streets. For that to happen, oil prices need to go down. And that will cause social unrest. And that will very likely cause the police to side with the protesters. Second scenario is a palace coup. He's surrounded himself with people who hate him. People who he's publicly humiliated on many occasions.
Because of his style and his way of ruling.
Exactly.
In your book, there are quite a few horror stories about people in opposition who get either severely beat up, they're the lucky ones, or they get shot, or they get poisoned with radioactive polonium and so forth. You personally have a US citizenship, so you could just go away and have an easy life with your 3 kids and your family. Aren't you afraid?
I get scared sometimes. I mean, you can't be scared 24 hours a day. And I'm sure that a lot of people in this room have been to places where people should be scared and aren't, because you get used to everything. But I haven't had anything horrible happen to me, obviously. I've had horrible things happen to my friends, so I don't want to exaggerate the risk that I face. The international attention to my book has been, I think, a sort of protective shield for me.
Yeah, but they broke into your apartment, or somebody did?
They've broken into my apartment, they've broken into my car, they've stolen my computers. That's not a reason to leave the country. I mean, actually, I see no reason to leave the country. It's my home, my family is there, my friends are there, my home is there. I stay, he leaves.
You lost your job? Okay.
I lost my job.
You stay, he leaves. Okay. This far, you had to leave, and he stayed because you lost your job because of him.
I did lose my job because of him, although he made sure it was offered back to me.
That's strange. You got a phone call one day.
I did, and
this was after you wrote the book.
So it was after I wrote the book, and I don't know. It's a long story, but I think one of the interesting aspects of this story is that I don't think he knows about the book still. Because for him to know about the book, someone would have to tell him. And nobody wants to tell him.
Anyway, he or somebody called you and asked for a meeting.
He called me. He called me.
He called you. He
called
himself,
me and asked for a meeting.
the
Yes.
Tsar, called you.
He called me. It's a long-standing Russian tradition. Russian czars and dictators have called.
They don't call everybody all the
time.
time.
No, not everybody, but
yeah,
the nice people. But it was actually the day after I got fired, so I was not feeling so well. I was kind of hungover, and I was in a taxi, and my phone rang, and somebody said, "Hold on, I'm going to connect you." And I held on for 2 minutes, and I got really furious because I was sure it was some sort of bank or telemarketing thing. And then another man came on and said, "Don't hang up, I'm about to connect you." And I started screaming at him. I didn't ask to be connected to anybody, and why do you keep me on hold, and do you want to at least introduce yourself? And then the voice on the other end said, Putin Vladimir Vladimirovich. So that was the introduction. And I thought it was a prank at first.
Who wouldn't? Right.
So I thought, okay, if this is being taped, how do I say something that on the one hand gets the message across about of how I feel about him, and on the other hand doesn't make me look like an idiot who would believe that Putin was actually calling her. So while I was thinking that, he was going on the phone about how he was very serious about his nature conservation efforts, and I had just been fired from this popular science magazine for refusing to cover his nature conservation efforts.
Because he was going to there to make a big PR stunt.
Right.
And you didn't want to play along.
Exactly. And he said, I'm very sincere about it, and it should be separate from politics, but for a person in my position, it's very difficult to separate one from the other. And I thought, okay, I'm going to say, if you are who you say you are, then you should know that everything you touch turns bad. And then he said, well, so if you don't mind, could you come to the Kremlin and we would talk about this? And I fumbled and said, well, how do I know this is not a prank? And he actually laughed, and he said, well, after we hang up, somebody from my administration is going to call you and schedule a meeting, and then I'll show up and you'll know it wasn't a prank. That's what happened.
And then, when you met, you went there?
I actually went there, and I did say to him that you should know that your involvement does not benefit these nature conservation efforts, that in fact, every time you get involved in something, people are so scared and try so hard that things go bad. And when you put that satellite collar on the polar bear had actually been captured days ahead of time and kept under sedation. And when you put that satellite collar on that tiger, and he's always trying to show he's king of the jungle. So these have to be really large animals. So when you put the satellite collar on the Siberian tiger, the tiger was actually borrowed from the zoo. And now with the cranes, there's information that 2 cranes died because they had to be delivered to where you flew with them.
Does anybody ever write these stories, the true stories?
They're in the blogs. They're in the blogs. They don't get beyond the blogs. Okay. So then he said, well, yes, of course there are excesses. But, I'm still trying to draw attention to the problem. Like that time with the amphorate, the ancient vases that he brought up from the bottom of the Black Sea.
Yeah.
He said, and then I was accused of having had the vases planted, that they had been borrowed from the Hermitage and put at the bottom of the Black Sea for him to find. He said, of course they were planted. And I thought, I can't believe this is happening. Okay. He actually thinks this is good PR.
Anyway, then he tried to give you your job back.
Right. My former publisher was there the entire time, and he got him to offer me my job back. And he wanted to show him that he was not being totally humiliated, although he was. So he said, I understand why you fired her, because there should be discipline at a magazine, just that as there should be in an army.
Of course.
And so he said, okay, are you willing to offer her her job back? And he said yes. And then he turned to me, and I was supposed to say yes. And instead I said, well, there's one more point. You said that there should be discipline at a magazine like there is in an army, but a magazine is not an army. He said, well, it depends on the army. And I said, actually, it doesn't. And then suddenly the conversation was over. He got up, he said, I see where this is going.
And you still believe that he does not know that the woman he met that opposed and had this attitude towards him was the same woman that wrote the book about him?
I don't think he knows about the existence of the book. I mean, he's not a subtle man. There would be no reason for him not to mention the book.
So
in fact, it would give him more power over me if he mentioned the book.
Okay, maybe sometime we'll know. How do you write a book like the book you've written, A Man Without a Face, in a country where people are scared shitless, or at least have very good reasons to stay quiet?
It's hard. I mean, that's not the hardest thing about it. because by the time I was actually writing the book, more and more people were coming out, and that equation of fear and money and personal connections, that was being undermined. So it was a lot easier when I was writing the book 2 years ago and a year ago than it would have been 5 years ago. But I think that the more difficult thing is when you do investigative journalism in a democracy, you have all sorts of tools to turn to. There are the police, there are the courts, there are the public records. They're always imperfect, and they have their own problems. But at least you, as a journalist, you don't do the police's work. I mean, you're not equipped to do that. You don't do the court's work. You don't do, the archives work. The problem with doing the sort of book that I did is that almost every story, with the possible exception of the Litvinenko murder, stops just short of my being able to say, okay, this is the truth as we know it.
No. Okay. Your book now is an international bestseller. How many copies have been sold in Russia?
Probably about 50.
50?
In English.
In English.
Right. Has not been translated.
Some very special bookstores in Moscow or something? Has no publisher been interested?
There was a publisher that was interested. They said they were very interested, but very scared, because, of course, they were in violation of 6 different tax laws. And they said, we're going to get shut down for tax reasons if we publish the book.
That's always the thing, tax reasons.
Yeah. So, well, because the laws are created in such a way that everybody's always in violation. So you can get anybody. And that's a very Soviet tactic. That's the way the Soviet laws worked as well. So anyway, they didn't publish the book, and they got shut down for tax reasons.
Okay, this could easily be done. So
yes,
no courts could help them in that case.
No, absolutely not. Okay. Look at Khodorkovsky.
Let's look into the UBR crystal ball here. Is there a chance for freedom of speech and democracy in Russia the way we know it here?
Yes, I think there's a chance. Every democracy, with the possible exception of 2, was not a democracy until it was.
Yes, of course. Okay, then in what time span?
In what time span?
You have to get rid of Mr. Putin first, I guess?
We have to get rid of Mr. Putin. We have to rebuild institutions. I mean, Russia did have a democracy, not a perfect one, but certainly a developing one in the 90s. And we're a lot smarter now, and really a much better educated society than in the 90s. So I think it is possible. And a lot of people I know are doing everything they can to bring that about.
Okay. Thank you for coming here. Good luck to you, and
Thank you.
Be careful out there.
Thank you.